How did we
I
get
mean,
here, Evan?
yeah, how do we get here? If I knew the answer to that, I don't know.
Hello, Internet. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kailey Bray. I am the VP of Marketing here at Infinite Stories. Infinite Stories is a TTRPG toolkit with an integrated marketplace that is staunchly against generative AI and here to support and uplift creatives and creators of all kinds, especially in the TTRPG space. And we are currently in pre-launch. So, hey, check it out maybe. app.infinitestories.com. So now I've said my plug. Now let's get to the reason why we're really here. Evan. Evan Winston is a fabulous human being. Real human. I
Oh,
checked.
thanks. Hi, Internet. I'm Evan Winston. I'm a lot of things. I'm a senior software engineer. Have been at LinkedIn slash Microsoft for a long time. Not there anymore, but that was sort of the tent pole of the technical side of my career. Otherwise, I'm an artist, have been forever, and I art direct for small studios in the TTRPG or publishing space. Wherever I can, I mentor younger artists. I teach usually once or twice a year. I keep myself busy as a father, but mostly as a copyright activist in this age of generative AI in which we find ourselves. And there's a lot to unpack there.
What do you think are like the top three things that we need to know about AI right now?
Three things you should know. I'll make it simple. One, it's not a foregone conclusion. So anyone who tells you things like the toothpaste is out of the tube, the genie's out of the lamp, the cat's out of the bag, that's a really reductive statement. Basically just saying it's here to stay. We all got to use it. It's the future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It may be here to stay. You know, we rarely roll back technology. But the way in which we consume it, the way in which we use it, the way in which it impacts us on a societal level, and the way in which we are able to regulate this as an industry and a new layer on top of the social contract is not a foregone conclusion. And giving up the agency that we have to direct how that is going to develop over the next decade, just because is not a good strategy. It's not a healthy strategy, and it's in no way it's in no way a guarantee to a good outcome. So that would be number one. It's not a foregone conclusion. And number two would be the existing ecosystem of generative AI is fundamentally unethical. So you'll hear a lot of companies, a lot of spokespeople and talking heads out there talk about responsible AI and responsible uses of AI, or how do I use this technology ethically? And the short answer, the very short answer, also reductive, but reductive because it is such a fundamental layer to this technology, is you can't. There is no way to use it ethically. There is no responsible use of it at this time. Now, there may be in future. There are some, you know, very thin exceptions to that rule. And a lot of this is predicated on us having the same understanding of what generative AI is, talking about the same thing, as it were. Number three would be it's not democratizing anything. So the past 5 years, the advent of generative AI, we've all heard things about democratizing creativity. It's democratizing skill sets like the ability to create beautiful art or you know, super compelling writing. It's not democratizing these skills. These skills were never gate kept. These skills were never resource heavy or difficult to pursue. It's not expensive to purchase paper and pencil. It's not expensive to pick up a stick and draw in the mud. It's not expensive to write in a journal. These are not prohibitively resource scarce skills. So it's not offering you anything except polish. It's not offering you anything except the last 5% of the painting process. And the way in which it offers that to you is fundamentally exploitative and unethical. So I'll come back to that, of course. But those are the three things. Let me see. What did I say? I said one, not a foregone conclusion. Two, the current landscape is fundamentally unethical. There's no good use for it. And three, it's not democratizing anything. It's not bringing anything, any net positive value to society. It is not unlocking doors for you. That's entirely a marketing and hype driven narrative that is being pushed by the arbiters of generative AI, as it were, in order to drive aggressive adoption to really push a strategy of regulatory entrepreneurship to basically become too big to sue before the legal system catches up with them. So yeah, those are my three things.
Wow, just taking like the top three kind of big talking points about AI and being like, no, which I'm kind of obsessed with. Because I hear especially the foregone conclusion stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, well, how do we, like, this is happening. That's an excuse a lot of people say. It's like, well, if this is going to be part of my industry, I need to learn it. I need to use it so that I can be the person telling the robots what to do. Um, and I understand that fear and that impulse to be like, you know, I had to learn how to make CDs because
hmm
vinyls were going out of style.
You bring up CDs. A lot of people bring up similar arguments, like photography to painting or
Right.
cars to horses. And yeah, this is not really about industrial paradigm shifts. It is because it's creating an industrial paradigm shift, but all of these historical precedents, the calculator for math students or math teachers, these are not devices or practices, A, that came on literally overnight. In many cases they were rapid, but adoption would take a decade or two or more in most of these cases. But two, these capabilities and these devices were not made possible by the wholesale consumption of all pre-existing intellectual property. And that's a really big sticking point that a lot of people seem to leave out. Cars are not driven on liquefied horses, is is
Whoa.
one way I like to phrase it sometimes.
That
Doesn't make
is
any sense, but you know what? It's just
horrifying.
yeah, it's a good image. Drives the point home in a way.
Hang on, say that again?
Cars are not made of liquefied horses, but these models, generative AI models that exist today, are 1,000% a product of figuratively liquefied creative intellectual property.
Oh man. What a great way to drive that point home. So, I think for specifically for the TTRPG industry, something that I see a lot of questions about are kind of twofold. One is, are there tricks, which like it feels like there isn't anymore, especially to spot generative AI kind of in the wild?
Yes, this is a tough conversation because, AI is always getting better. It's
Mm-hmm.
much better at hands than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So that's no longer necessarily the dead giveaway. There are still things you can pick apart. For instance, in the case of image generation in particular, and TTRPG, especially fantasy related image generation, loves buckles. Loves to throw buckles on everything. But, so do a lot of artists in this space.
Dude, love a
So
buckle.
it's, I'm hesitant to I'm always hesitant with this question because we run the risk of like creating an overly accusatory
Mm-hmm.
landscape. It's good to think about. They're good landmarks to keep in your head, and they're good things to look for when you're examining content and trying to determine is this generated or not. But we've also seen the dark side of that, where the controversy over the Thunderbolts movie poster, for instance. Was that hand artificially generated, or was it just really awkwardly cropped in such a way so as to suggest another finger? I think it was actually just a bad crop or an unfortunate choice of crop that quickly blew out of hand. Not to indemnify Disney or Marvel completely from generative AI use, but that can happen to independent creators as well, and it has. And it's been really unfortunate when creators have to turn around and prove that they made something with sketches or time lapses or some other sort of, social proof of I made this thing, it's not generated. Nobody should have to defend their work if it wasn't generated in that way. But things to look for, definitely buckles. My big cue is when hair, especially on female characters, when it just kind of morphs into like the collar, it just blends into a pauldron or they've got a strap and a strand of hair just sort of bleeds into it and there's no distinction between where the hair ends and the strap starts, little things like that.
Interesting.
Definitely good things to look for. The eyes are never perfectly matched up in such a way, um, So I mean, we always assume that lies should be like identical. If we're creating a symmetrical, non-disfigured, completely conventional looking and with a conventional physiology person. But as long as the head is not perfectly straight on with an image, there are going to be distinctions to the eye shape and how it's rendered in 2D, to the way light is playing on the eye. And so all of these things are not really considerations for AI. It doesn't really understand form. It just understands prediction and understands stochastic regurgitation. So those are other dead giveaways often. But the good baseline rule to use in evaluating something to determine if it's generated or not is to use your brain. So in the case of these images that make the rounds on Facebook of an impossible sculpture made entirely of challah. Is that real? Probably not. You can probably rule it out by a basic brain check. Other times, especially TTRPG, we're talking about illustrations of orcs and other goblinoids and monsters and creatures and dragons and sci-fi illustrations. Lots of cyberpunk pinups have come out of generative AI. All of these things, it's much, much harder to use your brain, as it were. But there is definitely a cohesive aesthetic to AI generated images which have been executed topically,
Mm.
which is to say, someone goes to Midjourney and prompts for an image and they get it, they walk away with it, and they're done. There are people who use it a lot more deliberately or a lot more with a lot more depth, and it's still terrible usage, but they can sort of break that pattern of recognizable aesthetic, the soapiness that comes with generated images. But by and large, you'll eliminate a lot of chaff if you just sort of try to tune yourself with what makes an image look and feel generated. And the same goes for writing. It's really hard to take a single sentence and say, "Yep, this was AI generated because it has an M dash." Some people like to use M dash. I like to use M dashes.
I miss an M dash.
Yeah, yeah. But, as you expand the sample, if you're going from one sentence to a paragraph to three paragraphs, you'll you'll start to spot more obvious indications of that kind of artifice, whether it's, an overlove of the term intricately carved wooden box. If you see it occur 7 times in one page, either someone's really bad at editing themselves or someone's using ChatGPT.
Yeah, I think that's always been my concern is, and I've seen this happen on the internet with artists of like, I'm just bad at drawing hands, or
Yeah.
like, the like, this is AI. It's like, no, we've come back around to no, I'm only human, and so it's bad
Yes.
for that reason, and not because I'm a robot. These like circular conversations are both
Yeah.
exhausting, and they're so that for me is also so human. Of the like, like no, and
It's
it's hard to
it's
know what to do in those situations.
for sure, and it's an interesting point because generated imagery, it often comes with a layer of quote unquote perfection,
Right.
perfect looking people in perfect looking environments, or perfectly epic looking environments, or perfectly on fire looking environments. Everything about it is perfect in some way, but then something like the hands are off, and that's a detail that we expect an artist who's capable of executing like a figure in that high of a quality
Mm-hmm.
to have tackled already in their career. And maybe they haven't. That's a really, that's a tough call. That's one of those moments where we fall into that gray zone. But I don't think it's healthy for anybody out there to get into the habit of trying to witch hunt for generative AI users. There are cases where it's crystal clear and there's purpose to engaging with people who are using generative AI and presenting them with reasons to stop or alternatives for sourcing their imagery or their assets or whatever it is that they're using it to generate. But to call someone out without any kind of verification system or any kind of conversation, it's not really helping anybody.
Right.
It's not. It's not the way forward.
For artists and creatives in general, and writing is so hard to do this. For
Yeah.
creatives looking to protect their work from generative AI scraping, training, theft, do you have any recommendations for them? Are there tools that exist? And we talked about this a little bit at
Yeah.
Gen Con.
The best thing that we can do are really the broad strokes of pushing for the kind of regulatory and legislative change that's going to
Mm-hmm.
make for healthier and more protective digital spaces. Barring that, there are tools like Glaze and Nightshade from Ben Zhao, a doctor at the University of Chicago, and his team. They developed this wonderful adversarial software that allows you to basically protect your artwork or poison your artwork so that no distinction is discernible to the human eye, but if put into an AI training data set, it will effectively poison the well. So I am happy to get into that further. But as far as writing goes, there's no good protective measure that I'm aware of, which is really unfortunate. And regardless, even with tools like Glaze or Nightshade, the internet is just it's a leaky sieve. There is no practical way to conceivably protect work that you put out there for the purposes of building business or of simply sharing, in a capacity that is socially understood to mean I'm sharing this for fun with these people in this group that I enjoy being a part of, not so that it can be commercially used in this way or so that some company can produce ersatz derivatives of this work just
Mm-hmm.
because I decided to share it with my friends who live in the UK or in Australia or any other part of the world. And those are really the changes that are going to need to happen at the platform level until we have commercial platforms that we can trust, i.e., not Meta. Uh,
Oof.
it's going to be an uphill battle. There are contenders out there like Kara and Blue Sky, which are much healthier platforms to use for exactly this purpose. And a lot of this comes to the basic consideration with which this issue is approached by companies like Meta, like LinkedIn, like X, is built on a philosophy of opt out, which is to say, if you use any of these platforms, your data, your content is automatically forfeit for their use, which
Right.
means they can use it for creating marketing material. They can use it to, as they put it often, to improve their services, improve their products or services. And that can often mean generative AI training, because that's a very, very loose term. Legally, it's a very, very wide and open definition. And so they use that to indemnify themselves against claims of copyright infringement for the most part. And beyond that, they rely on ineffectual reporting systems. But all of this puts the agency in the hands of the people using the platform, the creators. If I don't want my work to be picked up and trained and used to train the LinkedIn generative AI features, then I need to manually opt out on LinkedIn. Um, One, I need to trust that that opt-out system works in the way that I expect it to work. Two, it usually only works after you manually opt out, which is to say any content you've uploaded to the platform retroactively has already been consumed or has been earmarked for
Right.
consumption in that way. And three, it's an extremely onerous process that again puts the agency on you as a user rather than on the platform, which is now using these generative technologies to basically act as a publisher in their own rights, but they're managing to skirt the regulations that publishers are subject to.
How nice for them.
Yeah, right.
Brutal. So we've talked a lot about the things that are scary, challenging, rage-inducing, confusing in the landscape. Is there anything that brings you hope in the current landscape?
There's a healthy dose of Schadenfreude that gets me gives me a
That's
lot of hope.
fair.
I see a lot of ChatGPT 5 is underperforming ChatGPT 4. Yay. That kind of thing always gets me up and puts a smile on my face. But more constructively, there are still creatives out there fighting the good fight. There are companies like Paizo or Stonemaier Games that are taking very, very dedicated and explicit stances against generative AI, like Infinite Stories, uh, which is always a good thing. There are creators out there who are speaking out against generative AI in order to provide consumer education in order to influence policymakers' decisions, in order to galvanize, more grassroots resistance, and really provide signals, rather provide relevant signals for these large companies and platforms as to public perception of how they're engaging with generative AI. And that's really the most important thing that most of us as consumers can do. To put it another way, is vote with your wallet, you know? If you don't want to support generative AI, and there are many reasons not to, then don't endorse companies that create generative AI models on unethically trained data sets. For instance, Meta. But that's a particular hill that a lot of people are going to die on. It's going to be very difficult to extract ourselves as a society from platforms like Meta. As for creatives are still keeping on in spite of that. Even if they're not fighting the good fight, they're still creating. They're still doing what they do. And I don't want that to be a signal that we can all just kind of kick up our heels and it'll all work out for the best. And there's always going to be artists because that's not going to help anybody. It's certainly not going to help us. It's certainly not going to help them, the creators that we know and love and whose work we love. That always gives me hope. But yeah, seeing fan bases rally around creators who are putting out positive messages here, realizing that there's more to internet culture than just this consumptive toxicity, always gives me hope. And there are some really good things happening in the legal landscape. In the legal landscape, there are some 48 plus lawsuits going on in the US alone, some of them class action, that a lot of them have taken some really encouraging developments. So, yes, these things all give me hope. I'm really hopeful for the future. I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to take some positive steps here and, fingers crossed for algorithmic disgorgement, but that's the pie in the sky pipe dream.
So let's talk a little bit about that because I realized uh, I was essentially continuing the conversation that we were having at Gen Con, and for everyone who wasn't at Gen Con, let's talk a little bit about the baseline things. What is generative AI? How is
Yeah,
it different from the AI the overall? Say, what's the difference between generative AI that is more problematic versus the algorithms that are powering like my TikTok for you page or
right.
a Google search that doesn't. We're gonna take Gemini out of it for now. I wish I could for real, but like you know what I mean. When we say AI, what are we talking about?
So AI is really a really, really broad blanket term. It just means any kind of sophisticated algorithmic direction or computer program. So that could be anything from a random name generator, a random dice roller, Google search, or a generative AI model like Runway or Midjourney or Dolly, ChatGPT. And it's not exactly that they're good AI or bad AI. And we get into sci-fi. It's not exactly like there are good AI and bad AI because at the end of the day, AI is it really is a fairly agnostic tool. It becomes not agnostic when you consider who has developed the tool, for what purpose, who is in control of it. So, for instance, you mentioned your TikTok algorithm, and your TikTok algorithm is not generative AI, but it is not unproblematic for
Oh,
reasons that we
absolutely not.
we don't we don't need to get into. There's problems to it. There's problems to it. But the algorithm itself is really just a decision-making engine that the powers that be are using to keep you engaged in their platform. There's problematic ways with which they achieve that goal, and there's unproblematic ways with which they achieve that goal. Separate from that, we have generative AI as we know it today. And what really brought this landscape about was the sudden accessibility of large language models. So these are models which can reasonably interpret human language. Not because they understand human language, not because they have cognition, not because they're functioning the way human brain does, but because they consumed enough human language to develop a model that uses billions and billions and billions of tokens that associate meaning with strings of words and strings of characters, which is to say, when you ask ChatGPT a question, it doesn't really answer your question. It provides you something that sounds like an answer to your question. And that's a really important distinction. It doesn't know the information that it's giving you. It doesn't know that the information that it's giving you is true or false. It simply knows that if I try to predict what an answer to this question is going to sound like, This is it, and here you go. And it does that simply on the basis of all of the data, the training data that it has on which it has been trained. And that training data is where we run into the problem because ChatGPT is a commercialized product. It's a platform that a lot of people pay for, subscription fee. All of these models are subscription based or in other ways commercialized products. And these were all models that were trained on effectively the internet. So any image that has been posted on the internet, whether it's an image of your child, a photograph, whether it's, a snapshot of your personal medical data that you posted to a forum and said, "Can I get anybody's advice on this?" Or does anyone know about this drug over this drug? All of that is in there. Obviously, artwork that has been created, writing that has been written, every piece of creative property that exists on the internet, protected and not, has been consumed by these models. And then what these models do is they try to use that information to predict what the most likely response to a given prompt is. They regurgitate elements of their training data into a big, soupy, soapy mess of a regurgitated output. They use diffusion to introduce a degree of randomness from which they pull other elements of their training data, and then they give it to you. So all of those protected pieces of artwork and writing and other creative assets, they're direct inputs. They're direct raw materials. They are the costs of goods sold for anything that these models put out. But these companies have not paid for them. They have not licensed them. They have not provided remuneration to creators and rights holders. And they have not acknowledged the infringement in any meaningful way. And the fact of the matter is, the practice of training AI on data has been around as long as AI has been around.
Sure.
And as such, there are very legitimate data markets. There are very legitimate licensing markets and precedents for doing this kind of thing. And until Sam Altman decided to just ship it, or Ahmad Mostak decided to do what he did with stability, there was this academic wall between creating a commercialized AA product based on data that needed to be licensed properly and doing exclusively academic research. And they broke that wall. They broke that wall by taking everything and creating a commercialized product and saying, we don't need to pay for it. You don't need to pay for the raw materials that this product used in order to exist or uses in order to output things that are of value to you, our consumers. Yeah, so the I guess the long and short of that is, and I don't even remember what the question was anymore.
Hey, what's
Long and sh
AI?
the long and short of it is there's a good way to do what they're doing, and they're not doing it. They're choosing not to because it's more expensive. That's the short version. As for what AI is, generative AI is not your dice roller. It is not your random name generator. Those are AI, but they are not using liquefied copyright protected artwork and writing in order to function. Let's put it that way.
That yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it seems like you have a very clear opinion of what the right way to use this technology or a version of this technology would be. As you said when we started talking, this technology doesn't exist in an ethical way. There isn't an ethical way forward with this as it in its current form.
Hmm.
So what is the form that could be considered either ethical or sustainable or
Yeah. Let me be clear that I don't actually like it. So even if it were entirely ethical, I probably wouldn't want anything to do with it. But that's just my own personal taste. I would not be on my soapbox if it were ethical and I was just like, I don't know, that's kind of gross. I don't like it. I'd be nicer than that, probably. Maybe.
you'd
But
probably be nice.
is there an ethical use for this technology? Absolutely. There are definitely good uses for large language model driven generative AI. I mean, everything from transcription services, like in the TTRPG space. If you're a GM and you want to automatically transcribe a game that you're running, not just transcribe it, but automatically like take meaningful notes and story beats that are not explicitly said. So it's not hearing the exact words that you're saying, but it is notating these story beats in a fashion that is easy for you to consume after the fact. And stay caught up and all that. That's a great use of generative AI. There just isn't a very good way to do it right now. Bad use would be using ChatGPT to do your homework or, write an essay for you or GM a game for you. That's however a matter of opinion. It's a bad use for it, but there is an ethical way to do that, and the ethical way to do that is to license training data. Training data can be licensed. Opt-out models of participation can be opt-in, explicit opt-in, which honor consent and don't require creators and rights holders to play, DMCA whack-a-mole across
Brutal.
every platform that's ever existed. So yes, there is a way to do this right where my only gripes would be that's kind of skeezy, which is not, it doesn't really hold up and doesn't really get me a soapbox.
So when it comes to licensable data to train technology on, you said that was how it existed before, right?
Yeah,
Until suddenly kind of the floodgates opened, it sounds like,
correct.
with what happened there. How did we
I
get
mean,
here, Evan?
yeah, how did we get here? If I knew the answer to that, I don't know. How did it happen? It happened. So there were two main people that I personally hold responsible for this, and that is Imad Mostak of Stability or Stable Diffusion. Stability AI is the company, Stable Diffusion is the model, and Sam Altman of OpenAI, who everybody knows. Imad Mostak probably started it in such a way that forced Sam Altman into the corner where he decided to say, just ship it, and we are where we are. But effectively, these guys, Sam Altman and everybody, every CEO like him in the past, they follow a very recognizable libertarian playbook that comes out of places like Y Combinator, which if you're not part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, that whole world. What this means is it's all of these big name players come from the same origins. There's something out here called the PayPal Mafia, which is literally the founders of PayPal just spreading out their tendrils. They all formed their own companies after the fact, after selling PayPal. They all have created their own incubators. They all have incubated their own startup founders, like Sam Altman. And they all follow a very, very similar and recognizable libertarian playbook, one page of which is something called regulatory entrepreneurship, which is it's a pattern we all really know, even if we've never really thought about it or articulated it, and that is create a product, blitz scale as quickly as possible, develop a social dependency, and once everybody's hooked and you're too big to do away with, and you're too big to regulate, and you're too big to sue, start charging a subscription fee. And then we get into what is called, and forgive me for saying so, the enshittification of that product.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
we see this with the introduction of, Netflix creeping up prices or the introduction of ads in Amazon Prime. It's a very common pattern, but in the case of ChatGPT or these models, the way we got here is these guys decided to blitz scale, which means they broke through the academic wall. Everything they had been doing, which up to that point could probably be considered academic, which falls under the fair use umbrella and under the US copyright system, was suddenly not academic. It was commercial. And they scaled so quickly, so aggressively, and using such things like the extreme populism of cyberpunk pinups to accrue such intense and personally aggrandizing social buy-in so quickly that nobody could catch up. Regulators couldn't catch up, legislators can't catch up. Artists and writers who don't normally have to sit and debate at tables with software engineers and machine learning engineers and serial entrepreneurs and all of these folks suddenly had to debate with these folks in places like LinkedIn, a platform which is not made for artists, but is made for serial entrepreneurs. So they're fighting all of these battles. Their work is literally being stolen. They're being called in many cases things like paint pigs. Yeah, it was a fun time in 2020. Um, and so they're just getting cyberbullied on a regular basis. Their work is getting stolen, their work is getting devalued, and now we're seeing the ripple effects of that, where creative jobs are suffering, as well as non-creative jobs. Software engineer jobs are suffering. Copywriter jobs are creative jobs, but those are suffering. Trying to think of one in the writing realm. but a lot of editing jobs, all of these jobs across various verticals are suffering as a result of the aggressive driving of adoption of generative AI. And a lot of this was actually from Microsoft, which invested $10 billion in OpenAI. They are the ones who have driven a lot of the you must learn AI or you're going to get left behind. If your company isn't using AI, you're already behind. If you're not scheduling your meetings using generative AI, you're doing it wrong. They're the ones that have pushed this message all along. And they're also the ones that have pushed for the anthropomorphization of these models so as to make them more palatable.
Oh, listen, Clippy was my hard limit.
I
I think
miss
that's
Clippy.
as far as I'm willing to go with humanizing AI. And I know that there's a conversation about that happening right now at this very moment that I won't get into just because it's such a sensitive topic. We've seen the potential deadly consequences of AI being humanized in that, and becoming more and more palatable in that way. Spooky.
That's something that I would encourage everybody to think about. What could possibly be the business validation, the business reason, the business logic behind making an AI that feels extremely human, that is emotion, that laughs at your jokes, that chuckles when tell it a knock knock joke. There's no valid economic reason to support that except product stickiness, which is to say they want you to come back and keep talking to it. It's the only valid reason. It doesn't make you more productive if your AI has a personality. It doesn't make you write emails faster if your virtual assistant that is a generative AI, drops its H's, whatever it is. That doesn't help the actual business rule or business reason or business function that it is meant to and that it is billed to serve. It's merely there to make it stickier because we as humans, we like things that feel like anthropomorphized magic.
Yeah. I that yeah. The more every time I start to go down that rabbit hole, I get a little freaked out. And I think that's probably my survival instincts kicking in. To wrap up the conversation for today, I could talk about this with you forever. You just know so much, and hopefully we get to dig into some more like detailed stuff in the future. But you've mentioned a couple of people and a couple of resources already. Where do you look for the most accurate, up to date information about AI, generative AI, the technology, the laws? Are there people, publications, like platforms, other resources that
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
viewers can see?
There are unfortunately few because between the political and social climate that we live in right now, journalism is not the field that it was 10 years ago, especially tech journalism. But yes, there are a few. As far as like publications, there's an independent journalism group called 404 Media that I would definitely recommend for in general following insights into the tech industry that they not might not want everybody to know about.
Mm.
So they're not quite a whistleblower, but they do a lot of whistleblower journalism. There are individuals like Edward Lee. He's a legal professor at Santa Clara University, I think, University of Law, and he publishes extremely involved breakdowns of the legal developments across the United States and the lawsuits that are happening in the space. He offers a lot of insight, a lot of analysis of these developments, and a lot of what to look for next as far as judges' rulings or plaintiff actions, anything like that. And then, of course, there are individuals that I follow. A lot of them are big names in this space, like Dr. Timnit Gebru. She talks a lot about the transhumanism movement that's happening in Silicon Valley, or TESCREAL, a lot of the encoded bias and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of really dark stuff in there. But folks like Gary Marcus, he's another academic in the AI space. He's a really good insight. And then there are people who are closer to me personally, like either peers in the industry or peers in the space that I defer to quite a bit. There's Jim Amos. He's a former engineering manager at the Motley Fool, and he now writes almost exclusively on this subject. There's folks like Johan Cedmar-Brandstedt. Johan is my go-to for basically anything at this point in this space. He's an excellent resource, and everything he says is so darn intelligent. So
Oh yeah, no, that's great. We'll in the Discord and also in the probably with the YouTube description, all sorts of other things.
yeah.
We'll be sharing those on our socials and on our sites, so that for those of you who are interested, you're able to uh, take a look and keep staying informed. And I am going to continue to kidnap Evan for more conversations like this. He gets to keep the soapbox. I don't need it back. I still have so many questions. And if you have questions for Evan about generative AI or tech, or don't ask him legal questions as a lawyer, but he
Yeah,
might be
no,
able to
can't provide
point. Yeah,
legal advice.
we can't provide legal advice. And also, we're not IT. But if you have questions about generative AI or want more information, where to look to where to keep yourself current, feel free to drop your questions below in the Discord, wherever this exists on the internet. We'll have lots of ways for you to ask your questions, and we'll continue to do more videos like this, and hopefully be able to answer some of those questions in this form as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you, Evan, for joining us. I'm
Sure.
so excited to get to dig into this topic more with you here
Can
at
I
Infinite
close
Stories.
out with one thought
Oh, yeah, yeah.
before I kick it back to you? So the last thing I'd say is we all got into TTRPG stuff for one reason or another because we loved the art, we loved the writing, we loved the imagination, we loved the acting, whatever it is. It's made possible by a lot of really passionate and not usually financially remunerated creators. And it's made possible by something as fundamental as the OGL, you know. Without that, this space wouldn't be able to flourish in the way it does, and there's a lot of problems around that. But everything that generative AI does right now is anathema to all of that. It burns the OGL. It says you don't need creativity to do this. You can just close your eyes and turn off your brain. It is opposite of everything that I would assume drew us to this space.
And it doesn't belong here.
Yeah, that thing.
At least not with us, and not at Infinite Stories. For more information about Infinite Stories, you can head to app.infinitestories.com. Our pre-launch is live, or come join us in the Discord. We have conversations like this. We share art. Evan shares his art in the Discord, and it's so much fun. Come join us. We nerd out about nerdy stuff, and we support each other, and we hype up everyone's creations. We have a good time here. Again, if you've got questions, drop them below, and we'll share them with Evan. Evan will definitely see them, and next video, maybe we'll get to answer a couple. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.